Live from a storage locker underneath the Queensboro Bridge, it's Professor Thorgy's Top 100 Comics of 2018. I've been reading so many comics for this. Every single day for the past month. From sunup to sundown to sunup again, I've just been reading comic after comic to prepare for this video. You remember when you were a kid and your parents found you smoking, so they punished you by making you smoke an entire carton all at once? That's basically the closest experience I've had to that in my adult life. Sure was a lot of fun though. Yes, hello everyone, it's me, Aaron, and as I said, this is our annual Top 100 Comics of the Year list. And we've been doing this for about 4 years now, and yet this year's list is actually unique in a handful of ways. The first way that it's unique is just the number of books that were contenders this year. Every single year, I read 100 books that I would consider to be contenders for the best comic of the year, and then I keep going as far as I can. I try to make the biggest list I possibly can of books that I actually think could be contenders for that top 100 spot. And the first year that we did this, I read 110 books. Then the next year was 120, then 125. This year I read 140 books. Not total in the entire year. I read some books last year that weren't all that great, and I definitely would not consider them contenders for this. I read 140 books last year that I would consider to be worthy of being a top 100 comic. This is the first year in which I was looking at some of the books that didn't make it on the list, and I was actually mad that they didn't make it into the list. Like, I was looking at numbers 101 and thinking to myself, no, I was rooting you on. You could have made, I wanted you to make it into the list so bad. That is insane to me, that we have a top 100. And yet still, there were so many good books last year that I couldn't fit them all into a top 100. There's so many people out there in the geek community who are always saying that, well, everything is bad. No, man, there's amazing stuff out there. I was able to make a list of 100 amazing things out there, and I could have kept going. Now, the other reason that this year's list is actually unique is because this was the very first year in which I stopped reading physical comics, and I switched over completely to digital comics, which I think is one of the reasons why our list is so big this year, because with physical comics, I would read a book, and if I found it interesting, I would try and remember it for the next time that I went into the store to buy a book. Because I was reading digital now, I could just go ahead and go, oh, this is really good, buy. Oh, that was really good too, buy the next one, buy the entire set, keep going, and I just kept reading and reading and reading. I would be reading until 4 a.m. in the morning, and I would still just keep going, because with digital comics, you can do that. That is not me coming in here and saying, well, digital is the way to go, and I'm going to tell you why you should be reading digital. No, man, if you enjoy physical, go with it. I just found myself enjoying it so much more, and it also was kind of the reason why I was able to read far more books. But the main reason why I'm bringing that up is because normally I would like to start off every single one of our top 100 list by going, behold, and then pointing to the massive stack of books that I read from last year. I can't really do that this time. So instead I just kind of have to go, behold! I know this doesn't look that impressive, but this baby, this can fit so many comics inside of it. In fact, let's go ahead and take a look right now at how many books I still have left to read before we finalize this list. And oh, god damn it! Well, even though I have been reading all these books for the past month, it looks like I still have so much more research. Which, that's the amazing thing about comics, and also kind of the unfortunate thing about comics. There's always more out there, and they're always good. There's so many amazing things out there to still read. So I'm going to continue reading as many of these books as I possibly can until we start the actual list. So to kill some time, let's go ahead and refresh the ground rules for the top 100. Now, if you don't care about these ground rules, then go ahead and jump to this time right here. That's when the actual list is going to begin. However, I know that every single year there are many people out there who are going to have questions about what does count and what does not count, so we do kind of have to go over it. First ground rule, what counts as a book for this list? There are many different types of formats out there that can be considered a comic book. So what am I considering a comic book that is eligible to be on the top 100 list? The first thing out there that I am considering, regular floppy single issues. They come out every single month. You can go right to your local comic store and buy them. That's obvious. However, what is not obvious is that just because you had a book come out in 2018 does not mean you're being considered for the best 100 comics of 2018. If you are a single issue, you come out every single month type of comic, you have to have had at least 2 issues come out in that year. I say this because we have all seen those books out there that had a really good first issue, and then after that it just kind of fell apart, or they had a really good final issue, but everything up until then wasn't all that great. So yes, you have to have had at least 2 issues come out, and I'm going to judge the entire length of the series when I am talking about your book. You could have one absolutely amazing issue. If the rest of it was just okay, I'm going to take that amazing from that one issue and kind of divide it among all the other issues when I make up my mind. Along a similar line of thinking, I'm also going to judge every issue that you put out that year against all the other issues that every other series put out that year. What I mean by that is that if only 2 issues of your book came out in 2018 and they were both really darn good, and there's another book out there that had 12 issues come out in 2018 and they were just pretty darn good, 12 issues that are pretty darn good are going to be better than just 2 really good issues, because they gave me more entertainment over the course of the entire year than your 2 issues did. I got more out of those 12 pretty good issues than I got out of your 2 really good issues. I know that might not seem fair simply because not every book comes out at the exact same time, but it's a top 100 list. Nothing about this is fair. This is all just kind of here for fun. This is not the big golden stamp of, yes, this is the law. It's all just here for entertainment, man. I'm just here to recommend some books that I hope everybody enjoys. But I do have to actually come up with a way to judge all these books when not all of them began at the same time. And, well, that's going to be unfortunate for a couple of people, no matter what. Now, the next thing that counts for original graphic novels. If you put out a story and it came out in one single graphic novel this year, that is absolutely going to count. In fact, along those same lines, one-shots also count. Yes, you can't really have 2 issues of a one-shot come out, so yes, I kind of have to judge that one-shot kind of as a very small mini original graphic novel. However, if you are a graphic novel that was a collection of single issues that came out in 2017, but your graphic novel came out in 2018, that doesn't count. The original release of the material in that graphic novel came out in the previous year, so it counted for the previous year, not this year. Now, along those same lines, if you have a graphic novel that got its first release in America this year, and before that it had been released in other countries in previous years, I will still count it for this list because there was no way for me to be able to read that in the previous years. If it was released in America for the first time this year, even if it was released decades ago in another country for the first time, I'm still counting it as a new release for this list. Now, speaking of books that come out in other countries, something that does not count for our list is manga. And I know that some people are going to be upset about that. However, I've thought about including manga before, but it just raises too many questions. For example, there's some manga that gets English releases on the exact same day that it gets Japanese releases, so that works out fine, but then isn't that unfair to all the manga out there that doesn't get same day releases? And if a book gets released in America this year, should I still count it like I do with any other book that got a foreign release in a previous year and then got released this year? When with manga, a lot of that gets released digitally now very shortly after, so what do I consider to be the original release date of that book? And it just raises far too many questions. Plus, in all honesty, do you know how much manga is out there? If I started including manga, I couldn't just go, well, I really like My Hero Academia, so I'll consider that. No, I would have to consider all manga, the way that I consider all American books. And that would easily double the number of books that I would be considering for this list, and we just don't have time for that. Speaking of things that we do not consider because it would double, if not triple, the number of things I would have to consider, webcomics. Webcomics do not count for this list, simply because there's just so many of them. There is no way that I could possibly read as many of them as I would need to in order to be able to consider them for this list. Plus, when it comes to comics, I feel like the best comics out there, someone's going to be able to talk about them. If your stuff can get published Someone out there in some weird obscure magazine is going to find it and they're going to talk about it, and that will start some buzz, and eventually it might not sell that well. Everybody might not be going out there to read it, but me, a guy who is researching this stuff for this list, I would eventually be able to come across it. I would eventually be able to find this stuff. When it comes to webcomics though, there's so many webcomics out there. I've said this before. I honestly think the best webcomic in all of existence is one probably no one has ever even heard of because nobody has even found the site yet. So I just feel like it's unfair to throw webcomics in there. Unless your webcomic got a physical release this year. If all your webcomics were put together into a graphic novel, I will consider the graphic novel that got its first physical release this year as a book that can be a contender for this list. Next ground rule, and this is a ground rule that we've never had to have before on this show, but this year was a very interesting year for comics. What do I consider to be one installment of a book? And what I mean by that is that there were many books this year that had one series going, then it stopped, then a brand new series would begin for that exact same character. Or there would be other books out there that would be focusing on one character, but then the same writer would move on to the next book, and it would be a completely different book, but would be continuing the storylines and the characters of that previous book. Or there'd be another series out there that would continue all the way from the start to the end, but one of the writers would leave halfway in the middle of it. So the way that I am looking at books like that this year is I am considering runs to be actual issues. So in other words, if you're a writer who was working on book A, then you started working on book B, and book B was a continuation of book A, I'm counting that as one thing. If you were a writer working on book A, and then you left book A, and then writer B came onto book A, I'm considering all of book A to be two separate entries on this book, depending on who was writing it. It's going to sound a little bit confusing, but trust me, when we actually get into the list, it will make way more sense. And the last ground rule that we have to cover for this list is, what exactly is this list? Is it my personal favorite comics of the year? Or is it the best comics of the year? And a lot of people might wonder, well, what the heck is the difference between those two? Wouldn't your favorite also be your personal best comics of the year? Not really, because I can recognize that there's a lot of stuff in one book that hits me on a personal level. It's something that really speaks to the specific stuff that I really enjoy, but I can recognize that if you take that stuff out of the book, like my own personal taste, and just judge it completely objectively, maybe it's got a lot of problems that I myself am overlooking simply because I enjoy certain other elements of it just because they appeal so much to me. And on the other side of that, there could be some other stuff out there that I look at and go, well, this isn't for me at all, and I don't connect to this on any kind of a personal level. So I can't really get this whole level of entertainment out of it that I know a lot of other people are going to get. However, if a book is aimed at a specific audience, and it succeeds for that specific audience, even if I'm not a member of that specific audience, I can at least try to understand why that specific audience would enjoy that, and then try to judge that book on how well it appeals to that specific audience. So yeah, I would have to give it a couple of extra points if I can judge it and say, all right, I think this actually is good for the audience that it is aiming at, even if I'm not a member of that audience. Now, of course, that's not to say that I won't have my own personal opinion in here, simply because it's completely impossible to take all of your personal opinions out of judging something, especially out of judging 100 somethings. So yeah, my own personal opinion, even though I'm going to try and tap it down, I know subconsciously, somewhere where I'm not looking for it, it's gonna sneak in there and force me to change this list around in one way or another. It will have some kind of an impact on this list. So I am going to try and make a list of what I would consider to be objectively the best of the year. However, that's totally impossible to make something completely objective, so my own personal opinion will be thrown in here. So in the end, is this my favorite books of the year or what I consider to be the best books of the year? It's kind of a weird mishmash of the both of them. And again, I just want to remind everyone, I'm just one guy over here. I don't have an entire team of people reading comics for this and then we all get into a big debate in a boardroom for this. It's really just me. So I know there's a ton of things out there I didn't read this year. So if there's an amazing book out there that you absolutely love and it's not on the list because I didn't read it at all, then I apologize to you guys. But again, I like to hear from you guys. Let me know what books you really enjoyed this year in the comments down below. And I hope that I'm able to discover something new that I might have completely missed by going through those comments. Thank you guys for tuning in, and I guess all that's really left now is just to say, behold! Wait, went to sleep. There it is. Behold!
Number 100. Exorcisters. This is the story of two girls running an exorcism detective agency. Think of it as a far more upbeat and charming John Constantine. This book is very fun with great artwork, and before I was done with the first issue, I had instantly fallen in love with our two protagonists. The Swamp Thing Winter Special. Swamp Thing has captured a lot of tones over the years. He's been dark, he's been very personal, he's been human, he's been otherworldly, and this single issue sort of captured all of them at once. It was meant to be a tribute to his late creator, and honestly, I can't think of a better single issue to really capture everything that makes Swamp Thing special. I'm a huge fan of this character, and if you ever wanted to tell somebody why they should start reading Swamp Thing, I think this one-shot is a perfect thing to hand them. Number 98, Submerged. This is the first book on this list that is from Vault Comics, and I honestly believe that Vault Comics is probably the most underappreciated indie team out there. They put out some of the most creative science fiction and fantasy series, and this one is a great book to dive into, no pun intended. It is a story about a woman whose brother goes missing one night, and she has a suspicion he might have been dragged down to the subway right before a hurricane is approaching that is threatening to flood the entire area. However, as she goes exploring, she quickly discovers she's not in the subway. What she has found is a portal to some ghostly underworld made up of many different figures from several different mythologies. This is a really haunting series with a great imagination behind it. Number 97, Unbelievable Gwenpool. It is sad to see the Gwenpool series go this year. This is a book that I have mentioned several times. I had zero interest in reading this when it was announced, and it went on to become a book that was in the last 3 years of our top 100 list. This book is charming, it's loaded with heart, and it would have been way higher on this list if more than 2 issues had come out this year. Number 96, Why Art? This is a book that's really basically just about exploring the concept of art. It basically is one big self-meditation on why we create art. What is art? Why do we need art? And in the beginning, it felt almost like a children's book introduction to art. It's art can be big, art can be small, art can be this thing, art can be that thing. And I've read enough books like this over the year to know when it's going to deliver a left hook at the end. So in the beginning, I was like, okay, this seems incredibly simple, but I know it's leading somewhere. I know any moment now it's gonna hit me with some big surprise where it reveals to me what this was all really about, and sure enough, that's exactly what happened. Towards the end of this book, they all of a sudden come in here and they basically just go, this is what we really need from art, and this is why we create art, in one simple line without ever having to actually stop and explain that's what they're telling the audience. And yeah, I had to step back and applaud a little bit. I knew that they were going to do something like that in this book, and they still kind of surprised me with it, and it won me over in the end. Number 95, Peter Parker, The Spectacular SpiderMan. As I mentioned in the introduction, I can't judge a single issue of a series for this list. I have to judge every issue of it that came out in this year, or at least every issue of a particular creator's run, and I'm looking specifically at what Chip Zdarsky wrote on this book this year, and I'll admit, in the first half of the year, it was fun, it was alright, it wasn't anything really, no pun intended, spectacular, but his final issue on this run is the entire reason that this book made this list. The final issue of his run is really just hearing people discuss what they think Spider-Man is and what the importance of Spider-Man is, and it's honestly one of the best definitions of a character I've ever read. It might just be a bunch of people sitting around talking about what they think Spider-Man is, but it ended up being one of the best issues of a Spider-Man book I've ever read, and probably one of the most important issues of a Spider-Man book I've ever read. Number 94, Wasted Space. Alright, this is another book from Vault Comics, and remember how I said Vault Comics was creating some truly imaginative science fiction? Yeah, the books that Vault puts out are things that I look at and think no one else would ever have thought of an idea like this, and Wasted Space is a perfect example of that. It's set in the far future where there is a religion that is sweeping over the entire galaxy, and it stars a person who used to be the voice of God. He was someone who went out there and heard the word of God and then preached it to the masses, but he doesn't really care about God, and he knows that God doesn't care about us, so now he just doesn't care, but now he's being hunted down, so he and his robot prostitute have to escape them. Yeah, that's a sense that I never thought I'd hear. This book is creative, it's unlike anything that I've really ever read, and considering the fact that I read over 100 comics just in the last month to prepare for this list, yeah, the fact that it could still wow me like that, it definitely deserves a spot on this list just for that. Number 93, Murder Falcon. If you are a metalhead, you need to be reading Murder Falcon. This is a book about monsters that are invading our world, and it stars a man who used to lead his own rock band, but now after a series of horrible events, he can't bring himself to play anymore until Murder Falcon shows up. He is a creature that is here to fight off these monsters, but he's powered by rock and roll. So this man has to pick up his guitar and learn to jam out all over again. If they ever decide to turn this into a movie and they don't cast Jack Black for this film, that's probably the biggest misstep in movie-going history. This entire book really is just a salute to rock and metal. Number 92, Mr. and Mrs. X. This is the series where Gambit and Rogue finally tied the knot, they finally got married, and basically had the craziest honeymoon of all time. It's written by Kelly Thompson, who you're going to hear me mention several more times throughout this list, and Kelly Thompson really is one of the best writers in the industry for capturing really quirky humor and action, and this book absolutely shows that off. She has a great dynamic between Rogue and Gambit, and honestly, it kind of feels like this is the series that the two of them always should have had. Number 91, Cadet You. This is a series about a group of children who have to pilot giant robots to save the planet from creatures from space. Yes, it's a concept that we've seen before, but we've never really seen it with this much heart. And this year, they doubled down on the amount of heart that they put into this book. We got to watch as these misfits all came together and started to care about each other even more and start to work together even closer, and that honestly was my favorite thing about the series this year. If you have a kid who's really into science fiction, or you yourself are just a kid at heart and you enjoy science fiction, you need to be reading Cadet You. Number 90, Modern Fantasy. Here's a little confession about myself. I absolutely love when people merge science fiction or fantasy with mundane reality. I love seeing just the everyday lives of people who live in big fantasy worlds, and Modern Fantasy is a wonderful take on that premise. Think of it like this. Imagine if wizards and dragons and orcs and all the other mythical creatures that you read about in Lord of the Rings or you played in Dungeons and Dragons, they all existed hundreds of years ago. And now society is kind of advanced and we all just sort of started getting along together, and now we all work together in cubicles and we all take the subway together every single day. That's sort of the world that you're going to find yourself in Modern Fantasy, and this series focuses on one ranger who really wanted to go out there and have an adventure, but she now just works in this cubicle all day. It's a great metaphor for anyone out there who ever had big dreams and aspirations, but now you find yourself just hating your 9-to-5 day job. But then one day you actually get that chance to go out there on that thing you always wanted to do, and you find, maybe it's a little bit different from what you had always imagined. Number 89, Bitterroot. As I said, it's kind of hard for any book that only had 2 issues come out this year to get that high on this list. And if Bitterroot had more than just 2 issues come out in 2018, it would be way higher on this list. This series reunites writer David Walker and artist Sanford Green, the same team behind Power Man and Iron Fist, and they did not disappoint when they came back together again. It's a story all about people hunting down weird monsters during the Harlem Renaissance. It deals with numerous issues, but throws a huge imagination in there, and I love this cast of characters. Berg was an instant breakout star for me. Number 88, Life of Captain Marvel. Now, if you've watched this channel for a while, then you know that I really love the character of Captain Marvel, but I didn't really care much for Margaret Stoll's run on the book. I didn't really think that she captured the space exploration side of Captain Marvel. I didn't think she was a bad writer, I just didn't think that this is exactly something that was her specialty. But this year, I discovered that her specialty is writing really down-to-earth stories about finding out where you fit in and finding your particular place in your family and really getting to explore your own relationships with the other members of your family, especially the relationships between a mother and daughter. That's what Life of Captain Marvel was about. They didn't even really get into the big crazy sci-fi side of Captain Marvel until the last 2 issues, and I'm actually glad they didn't get into the sci-fi side until the end because yeah, that's exactly what Margaret Stoll knows how to write. She did a wonderful job capturing a far more human and down-to-earth side of Captain Marvel and really basically just writing a charming story about someone learning about the past of their family. Number 87, The Terrifics. Now, it's fairly obvious when this book was created that it was DC's attempt to fill the hole that Marvel had left when they took away the Fantastic Four. It was DC basically trying to go, hey man, if you're not gonna make this team, we'll make this team. But as you read the series, you learn it's far more than just that. It's not DC coming in here and just trying to say, hey, we're just going to create our own Fantastic Four. It's DC really trying to create a tribute to the silver and golden age of comics. If you're somebody who's been looking for more old school style stories that are just really imaginative sci-fi tales of heroes going out there and exploring the unknown, then I think this book actually does a really good job of capturing that. Number 86, Southern Bastards. Again, as I said, if only 2 issues of your book came out this year, it's really hard for you to get that high on this list. And Southern Bastards only had 2 issues come out this year, and it hurt that only 2 issues of it came out this year. This has been one of my favorite Image comics over the past couple of years, and the fact that only 2 issues came out, that on its own would be enough to drive me a little bit nuts. But this year, we finally saw the confrontation that we had been waiting on. We had been sitting here and slowly watching as these 2 immovable forces had been heading towards each other, and this year, it finally happened. And we're kind of waiting to see what comes next. So I'm really hoping that next year, this book can get higher on this list, not because the book will be better, this book is already amazing, but just because I want more of it. Number 85, Plastic Man. Writer Gail Simone has one of the most unique and quirky senses of humor in the entire comic book industry, and who knew that sense of humor would be a perfect match for Plastic Man. I think the way that she is merging his bouncy, springy, upbeat personality with the darker background he came from of being a criminal and him trying to infiltrate that world again, it's stunning to me how well she was able to make those 2 things work hand in hand. Number 84, Extermination. I will be totally honest with you. The X-Men get a lot of miniseries that I just don't care about because a lot of them are just, okay, not bad. Nothing really impressive though. So when they announced that they were going to be giving the all-new X-Men yet another miniseries that was going to explore whether or not they could go home and what was going on with them exactly, I had very little interest in. Little did I know that this book was going to be one of the best X-Men miniseries that we've gotten in a long time. It kicked the door down and instantly made you start paying attention to this plot because big major events were happening left and right, one after the other, but it didn't feel random. It felt like, oh, finally, these dominoes we've been stacking up all this time are actually getting knocked over. This is a book where you'll have a major villain return, 2 deaths, and a huge revelation about a character all within the first issue, and every issue after that doesn't slow down. They just keep it going. Number 83, Magic Order. How much you enjoy this book is probably going to depend on how much you enjoy Mark Millar, because the dialogue in this book is the most Mark Millar dialogue that ever Mark Millar'd. And I'll admit, I myself personally am not really a fan of Mark Millar dialogue, but I understand why someone would enjoy it. And for those people, I can look at this book and say, hey, yeah, it actually is exactly what these people would enjoy, and I can find the humor and the wit in what he's writing here, even if it's not my personal thing. So I do still have to give it some praise for that, but even beyond the dialogue, I really have to applaud this book for the imagination behind it. This book really feels like Mark Millar just let every idea he possibly had about magic all loose there on the page, and it really does feel epic. It feels huge, and a lot of that also has to do with the fact that Olivier Coipel really just knocked it out of the park on every page. This is some of the most stunning art of his career, and that's a guy who's done nothing but stunning art. With Mark Millar's imagination creating really huge magical backdrops, and Olivier Coipel just being allowed to go crazy with it, this actually was the perfect pair for this book. Number 82, Marvel 2-in-1. I am consistently surprised by what Chip Zdarsky is able to do. Because I remember when that guy showed up and he was really just the jokey, funny guy who cracked wise about Garfield. But this year he came in here and with one book after another, he just continuously surprised us by how emotional he could get. This entire series was about Ben Grimm and Johnny Storm going out there to try and find Reed and Sue. And it's really kind of just a tribute to the Fantastic Four. It's a tribute to why we need that team and why we care about that team and those characters. Number 81. Now this is the first one in which we are going to combine two series together. It is Superman and Action Comics. I feel it is appropriate to combine them together because the thing that gets them both on this list is really Brian Michael Bendis. When he got put on Superman, I didn't really know what to expect. Brian Michael Bendis can do some really great stuff. He can do some less than great stuff. You guys know me, I have had a very rocky history with this writer, but so far, he has actually been doing a very successful job on Superman Action Comics, and I think the thing that unites both of these titles, the thing that really captures why I think he's doing a good job on Superman so far, is the fact that he's doing a good job on Superman. Brian Michael Bendis is one of those writers who I've always kind of critiqued for making everybody kind of talk the same. When I read his Superman, I say, that's Superman. He absolutely understands this character, and with almost every word that comes out of either Clark Kent or Superman's mouth, he reminds me all over again of why I like that character. Number 80, Catwoman. A lot of people were hesitant to go into this book because the wedding of Batman and Catwoman and how that was resolved, it sort of left a little bit of a bad taste in their mouth. And if you're one of those people, I am telling you, go and pick up Catwoman. This book is a great solo series for this character. The artwork, the cast, the mystery, everything about it really does just kind of capture what I want in a Catwoman book. Number 79, Nick Spencer's Amazing Spider-Man. There's a lot to say about Nick Spencer's Amazing Spider-Man, about why I'm enjoying it so much. A lot of it has to do with the fact that it just feels comfortable right now. Spider-Man over the past several years has kind of felt like it's constantly going from one big thing into the next. And this book actually kind of feels like I can read a Spider-Man book and breathe again. It finally feels like, I know who Peter Parker is again, and I know his living situation, and I know what's happening over here. So I will admit, one of the reasons why I am putting this book on the list is because it just feels really nice to have a Spider-Man book again, where it doesn't feel like every single issue could completely destroy his life in one single page. But the main reason why it's on this list is because Nick Spencer absolutely understands the humor behind Spider-Man, but also the heart behind Spider-Man. Yes, when he had Peter Parker get back together with Mary Jane, you could hear the entire fan base let out a massive sigh of relief. And it's not just that he had the two of them get back together, it's that he actually does a great job of capturing what works between the two of them. When the two of them are together, you absolutely understand why they are such a good couple. And he gives so many dimensions to Mary Jane, the issue where she has to go to the support group for people who are friends with other superheroes. That was an amazing moment for her character. Number 78, Matthew Rosenberg's Punisher. Now, if you had told me over a year ago that the Punisher was going to load up in the War Machine costume and we would have an entire series all about that, and it was going to turn out to be one of the best Punisher storylines in a while, I probably would have looked at you like you were crazy, and I know I would have done that because in my comic book store, when I kept trying to convince people that this was such a good Punisher storyline, that's the exact look that they gave me. It feels so bizarre to think that Punisher getting the War Machine costume would be a great storyline, but it actually was. And even after he lost the suit, Matthew Rosenberg did not slow down when he started the brand new Punisher series, and we really got that down-to-earth, gritty Frank all over again, and Matt proved that, yeah, he can write Punisher no matter what suit he's wearing. Number 77, Persephone. This is a story about a young girl growing up in a world full of magic and wonder, and everyone's friendly and gets along together, and it's this bright, shining utopia. But there is another world out there, one where the sun never rises, food never grows, everyone is being tormented, it's awful, they're starving, they want some help, and then one day Persephone ends up getting kidnapped and taken into this dark world, and she is cursed to never be able to return. However, as she stays there, she really starts to care about the people. She wants to help them. She tries to do everything she can to try and make their lives better, but she slowly starts to learn that there is a secret to her origin. There is a reason why she was brought back to this world. This book is not only incredibly imaginative, but also so charming, and I feel like it does a wonderful job of walking that tightrope in between being something aimed at kids, something that only adults can enjoy, and because of that, it's able to create something that I think anybody out there who is a really unique reader, somebody who really wants something that can challenge a younger reader or can make an older reader feel young and vibrant again, anybody out there who's looking for something like that, I think that Persephone is a great book for that. Number 76, Batman. I'll be totally honest with you guys, this was a hard one to find where I wanted to put because this year Tom King's Batman kind of went all over the place for me. There were some issues that I absolutely loved. There were some issues that I really kind of hated. And there's other issues that I felt both ways about almost at the same time. However, in the end, despite the complaints I might have had with it, this book still needed to land somewhere on this list because when you watched our top 10 villains of the year list, 2 of them were on there because of Tom King's Batman. When you watched our favorite moments of the year, a very high moment on there came from Tom King's Batman. This is a series that, despite what problems I might have with it, when it hits the ball, it tends to be a home run. Number 75, Giant Days. I feel like I have nothing left to say about Giant Days, because if you've watched our top 100 books of the year list over the past several years, this has always been on there. And it's always been roughly around the same spot. And there's a reason for that. It's one of the most consistently well-written books on the market. This book is all about 3 friends going to university, and it's really just a book about them growing up, and this was the year in which they also started to grow away from each other a little bit. They had to finally start developing into their own selves and start to move on with their lives as university was getting close to coming to an end. And yeah, that did kind of make the book a little sad, but it also made it so much more realistic. And for a book that has always been so fun because of how charming and witty it can be, throwing that little punch of reality in there kept it fresh. It kept it in my mind. It kept me reading it for more than just laughs. And listen, I could keep going on and on, but as I said, this thing has been on our top 100 comics of the year list for 4 years in a row now. If you have not read Giant Days yet, then I don't know what else I have to say. I think next year when it appears on this list, I'm just going to say, Giant Days. You know why. Number 74, Extremity. Extremity is another series that isn't any higher on this list because so few issues of it came out this year, but this has been one of the most imaginative and creative worlds I have ever read in a comic, with this really personal and touching story about family and about loss right there at the center of it. This is a series where there's so many different players with so many different backstories, and every single one of them is kind of just in this big gray area because everything going through their head is so complex, and that's what I love about this book. If you want a fantasy story with really deep characters, Extremity is the book to go with. Number 73, Miss Marvel. Again, kind of like Giant Days, I sort of feel like I don't even need to tell you guys why Miss Marvel is on this list. She's always on this list because this book is always good. G. Willow Wilson continued to tell the story of the most charming superhero to grace comics in the past decade, and every single issue just showed her growing a little bit more. It showed her having to deal with the personal internal struggles that we've all had to go through at some point in time, continuing to make her so relatable, which is one of the things that has always made this book such a success. Yeah, it's amazing to me that even after being around for 5 years, Miss Marvel is still just that darn good. Number 72, Dark Knight's Metal. Again, only 2 issues of this book came out this year. However, it was the finale to what was one of the largest events in DC history, and it went out on a bang. We so often get jaded by huge giant crossovers, we so often get jaded by the word epic, but the end of this storyline came in here and reminded us of what a truly epic ending actually looks like. 2018, in my opinion, was the year when Scott Snyder was really allowed to just let his imagination go nuts, when DC just handed him the entire toy box and said, do whatever you want with it, and the end of Dark Knight's Metal was kind of when all that kicked off. Number 71, Bloodshot Salvation. I will admit, I keep sleeping on Bloodshot. Every now and again, I go back and I read it and I remind myself, oh man, I forgot how good this book was. And this was another one of those years where I went back and read it and reminded myself, yeah, this book really is that good. You look at Bloodshot and you think, okay, he's just some 90s hero who's just a guy with a gun and a healing factor. It's a dime a dozen. There's so many of them. But Jeff Lemire is able to take his wild imagination and his ability to write really personal, touching stories and bring both of those to this character to make it one of the most unique books out there. If you told me one of the best stories this year about family was going to come from the book about a guy who's just really good at shooting people, I probably wouldn't have believed you, but now I can't deny that's absolutely true. Number 70, another entry in which we were combining 2 books together, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers and Go-Go Power Rangers. I'm going to start off with a confession that I've mentioned several times on this channel, but just to give everyone out there a refresher, I'm not a Power Rangers fan. I don't hate them, they're just not my thing. I've tried to read this book, everyone has told me this book is so good, everybody has praised it, but I just have like zero emotional connection to the Power Rangers, so it's really hard for me to really get into these series at all. But this was the year in which everyone kept telling me, no, you need to read the Shattered Grid storyline. The giant Power Rangers crossover, you have to read that. Even if you're not a Power Rangers fan, you have to read it because it's so darn good. So I decided, you know what, fine, I will go out there, I will read it. And yeah, you were right, it was so darn good. Even I, as someone who is not into Power Rangers, could read that and say, yeah, you know what, this is actually a really huge storyline that you can feel the weight of, even when you don't have the connection to the characters that so many of the readers are supposed to have. Even I, as someone who had not been following this series, someone who didn't really care about these characters, I could read this and actually start caring about these characters. In the very beginning of this storyline, they end up doing something to a character that I was honestly stunned at. So I can only imagine how the fans of this book must have felt. And after that, every single issue just kept raising the stakes. The tension kept growing with every single issue, and yeah, that's kind of what you want from a big, massive event storyline. So for giving all the Power Ranger fans out there exactly what they want and making a storyline that even someone who isn't into Power Rangers could actually enjoy, both these books absolutely deserve a spot on this list. Number 69, Injustice 2. Year after year goes by in which I continue to be shocked at how good Tom Taylor is able to make a video game tie-in series. This thing began as nothing but a cash grab, but Tom Taylor is such a talented writer. He is able to put so much emotion into every single issue of this. He is able to throw in there such big name characters that you would not expect into this little tiny tie-in book, and yet you're still shocked whenever they pop up. He's able to put in here twists and turns that you really should see coming because you know what's coming in the game, and yet you still want to keep reading it. He's able to take minor, small characters who aren't even in the game that you shouldn't even care about at all and give them so many dimensions and make you actually really start caring about them. If you still, after all these years, are sitting around saying, yeah, I don't want to read Injustice 2 because it's a tie-in to this video game and those are never good, this is the ultimate exception to the rule. This is the video game tie-in book that proves it is possible to make them not only good, but great. Number 68, Monstrous. If you are into dark fantasy, you need to be reading Monstrous. If you like Game of Thrones style storylines where there's so many different houses and factions and groups of peoples with their own backstories and their own motivations, and they're all twisting and turning and coming together and betraying each other and forming alliances, you need to be reading Monstrous. And if you just want a really darn good looking book with some of the best designed characters and worlds that you are ever going to see, you need to be reading Monstrous. Number 67, The New World. This is a series that takes place in a future where there are game shows sponsored by the government where hunters go out there to chase down criminals, and then you, the viewer at home, get to vote on whether or not the hunter kills them or lets them live at the end of the episode. It's pretty dark and grim, and this series focuses on one of these hunters, but it also focuses on an anarchist who is trying to bring down the entire system, and the two of them actually meet and actually kind of fall for each other. And when this anarchist becomes the subject of the next hunt, the hunter decides, you know what, I'm done with this. I never liked doing this, and this is actually a pretty good time for me to give my letter of resignation right here on live television. So now, one of the best hunters in the industry is pairing up with this crazy young anarchist, and the two of them are on the run from the system she was just a part of. It's the kind of crazy concept for a series that could only come from the mind of a Les Cott and is brought to life gorgeously by Tradd Moore. Listen, I'm pretty sure that if Tradd Moore just draws anything, it's at least going to get to the number 100 spot. His art alone is that good, and this series pushes it in directions that I've never really seen him go in before. Number 66, Isola. This was actually one of my favorite new fantasy series of the year. It's about the captain of the royal guard who has to escort the queen, except the queen has been transformed by an evil spell into a tiger. Now this book actually succeeds on several levels for me. The first one being the artwork, because as our two protagonists have to head out through this jungle, the artwork is able to make you just feel this sense of magic that is in the air. It really does make you feel what a wondrous fantasy world you are now entering when you pick this series up. But the thing that I love the most about is that the captain of the royal guard cares about their queen so much, and yet the queen can't even talk to him because they're a tiger. And yet, that actually provides some of the best back and forth in this entire book. As you see just how pained this captain is, you can then look over at the tiger and just tell that there's nothing they can really do about it. And the silence between the two of them speaks volumes. Number 65, Fant Bukowski 3, A Perfect Failure. 2 years ago, I put the first Fant Bukowski book on our top 100 books of the year list. I had no idea that this series continued until this year. I had to go out and instantly read up the rest of this series, and I'm pleased to say, yeah, it still captures the, I don't know if magic is the right word to use, but it captures what made that original book so special. It never got old for me. For anybody who didn't see me talk about this 2 years ago, Fant Bukowski is someone who he believes in his heart of hearts he is the greatest poetic genius the world has ever known, but instead he's just kind of an idiot. He's basically a massive walking failure who has convinced himself the rest of the world is just too stupid to understand my brilliance. For anybody out there who wants to be an artist, you want to be a writer, you want to be a creator of some kind, you need to read Fant Bukowski, because it is one of the greatest reality checks you will ever read. If you want to go out there and be an artist, if you want to create something really special, if you want to go out there and make what's in your head come to life, then go out there and do it. Go out there and try and achieve your dream. However, we've all seen those people out there who end up just becoming really pompous and pretentious because they believe that they have a genius that no one else can understand. And this entire book is basically about turning to you, the person who wants to be an artist, and saying, hey, are you noticing any trends here? is Fanty doing some things that maybe you might have done in your life? And I guarantee you, everybody out there, at least some point in one of these books, you will find something that will make you go, oh crap, I kind of do that too. And it will make you kind of come to a realization about yourself. This is a series that is a wonderful satire for anybody out there who really does want to be creative in one way or another. Number 64, Unbeatable Squirrel Girl. Just like Giant Days, just like Miss Marvel, I feel like there really is nothing I have left to add to this book that I haven't said in years past, because this has just remained consistently fantastic. It is stunning to me that this book is almost at issue 50, and yet it still hasn't lost that magic. And this year, the artist who helped create this title ended up leaving, and I was afraid, oh man, it's going to lose it. It's going to lose that thing that always made it special. No, it still has it. It still absolutely has that charm and that wit about it. Squirrel Girl herself is still one of the best characters in any comic out there. Her interactions with her friends are so uniquely perfect that there's no way anybody else could ever capture it quite this well. And this year we saw even more interactions between her and longtime on-again, off-again supporting character Kraven the Hunter that honestly took everything that I loved about their character dynamic to a whole new level. Number 63, Hotman. Hotman as a character has kind of been all over the place over the past couple years at DC. It's like they've been really trying to figure out what they want to do with that character, and I feel like this was the year in which they realized, oh, that's what he's supposed to be. This book was almost like if Indiana Jones merged with magic and interdimensional space operas. It's got imagination, it's got gorgeous art from Brian Hitch, but it's also got this pulpy charm to it. Like when you read this book, it feels like a modern day book, but at the same time, it almost feels like something that you would pick up from the Doc Savage era of comics. And in a weird way, that's kind of what Hotman, an archaeologist superhero, should feel like. Number 62, Domino. There have been many things that I've enjoyed about Gail Simone's writing over the years, but if I think about all of them put into a single book at the same time, I would be imagining the Domino series. It's full of great supporting characters who have really charming interactions with each other, thrills and action that are brought to life by a very talented artist, but to me the thing that makes this book work the best is the wit. It's Domino's own personality, which Gail Simone is able to capture just right. She gets inside Domino's head and takes you along for the ride, and she's even able to give some dimensions to Domino that I never really saw in any other book before. The way that Domino describes how her powers work and how her powers feel was something that I never really thought about, but now it's something that I can't look at Domino and not think about. Number 61, Rise of the Black Panther. With the Black Panther film coming out earlier this year, it was no surprise that Marvel wanted to put out there a mini-series that really retold the origin story of T'Challa, but what was the big surprise was how incredibly good it was. This was not some cash grab that they made just because, hey, we can make it tie into the movie. No, they really put effort into this. They came in here and they wanted to make sure that they didn't just tell a new origin story for the Black Panther, they were going to tell the definitive origin story for the Black Panther. It takes so many things that worked from almost every incarnation of the Black Panther, as well as many different elements that had never interacted with the Black Panther before, but really kind of made sense to interact with him, and they threw it all into one book and made it feel so streamlined and smooth that if you ever need an introduction to Black Panther, this is the book to get. Number 60, Deathbed. This is a series about an aging adventurer. Think every single one of your old classic pulp heroes all rolled into one. His legends are extraordinary, his personality is bigger than life. However, he is also the world's most arrogant D-bag. This guy is a horrible human being who only cares about himself, and when he finds that everyone he ever interacted with is dying off one by one, he has to go and save them, not because he cares about them, but because if they're dead, then who will tell his story? So while he goes out there on this crazy world-traveling adventure, he brings a journalist along with him to capture it all. And as they embark, it becomes clear this story is going to be all about someone having to constantly reality check the ego of the world's greatest explorer. It's got humor, it's got action, and it has got boatloads of imagination. Number 59, Jessica Jones. When I heard that Kelly Thompson was going to be taking over Jessica Jones from Brian Michael Bendis, I didn't know what to expect because Kelly Thompson is a great writer, but she tends to focus on more light stuff, on stuff that is far more fun, whereas Jessica Jones is incredibly dark and serious. So this was indeed Kelly Thompson stepping out of her comfort zone, and she still absolutely nailed it. She proved that her comfort zone is way larger than I thought. Every single page of this book had to get inside Jessica Jones's head, and you could feel the weight that is constantly pressing down on her. Whether it's her at her agency, her at the police office, her just getting in way over her head, or her just out with her family, you could feel what absolute pressure she was always under. And it was able to create this feeling like there was always a mystery around every corner, like something wasn't quite right. And for a book about a detective, that's absolutely the feeling you want it to have. Number 58, Wicked and Divine. If you still have not read Wiccan Divine, this probably was not the year to start, because this was the year in which we finally started getting some answers. This was the year in which we started to learn the backstory to all these gods, and why this whole resurrection cycle began, and we also started to learn the mystery behind some of these gods, and who some of them really were, and it changed the way that we looked at this entire overall storyline. After I found out some of these revelations, I wanted to go back and reread this entire series because I knew that now that I could see more of the puzzle pieces, I would have a completely different interpretation of it. Number 57, Eternity Girl. Here's something you're going to hear me say a lot throughout the rest of these episodes. This was a weird one, and it's kind of hard to sum everything up about this because Eternity Girl is a series about 20 different things all happening at once, or maybe they're not happening at once, or maybe you just think they are, but they're really happening in a different way, and yeah, it's a very complicated storyline. But in the end, what it's actually about is just what it feels like to not be comfortable in your own skin. It's a story that's about trying to basically live with who you are, what you've done, and constantly having to think about all that every single second of every single day. I would go into way more details about this, but Eternity Girl is one of those series where you can't really explain what makes it special or what the messages are. You really have to just read it and kind of just fall into the deep end of it. And believe me, there's so much there to fall into. Number 56, Runaways. When Runaways returned in 2017, I thought it was a beautiful continuation of the series. I thought it captured everything that I loved about the book when it first began, but I had that thought in the back of my head of, what if they can't keep this going? What if it doesn't continue to be this good next year? And much to my pleasant surprise, they kept it going, and it was just as good this year. This book continued to explore these characters' relationships with each other, and we watched these characters grow and mature, which really adds heart is what Runaways is. It's not really a story about superheroes, it's a story about people just growing up and growing closer with each other. And that's what they continue to do with every single issue this year. Alright, ready for another weird one? At number 55, My Boyfriend is a Bear. I remember I was still working at the comic shop when this book came into our store, and we all looked at and we laughed at what a crazy concept for a book it was. And then at the end of the year, I saw it popping up on so many people's best comics of the year list, and I thought, alright, maybe I should have checked that out when I had the chance. So I went back, I read it, and you know something? Yeah, it deserves to be one of the best books of the year. On the surface, this is a book about a young woman who is fed up with the dating scene, and she starts dating a bear. Now, underneath that surface, there's a whole lot of metaphors in here about what the dating scene is like and how hard it is to actually find that special someone out there and what people actually want from each other in a relationship, and that stuff is actually really touching. But again, on that surface level, this is actually just a really damn good comedy about how crazy it would be if you started dating a bear. There's so many moments in here that cause me to just start cracking up. There's scenes in here where she has to take the bear to meet her friends, and everyone else reacts perfectly normal to this. Everyone acts the way that you should if a giant bear walked into a restaurant, and she's still acting like it's no big deal, and everyone's over-exaggerating. And I love those moments in here. They cracked me up all throughout it. But again, I have to come in here and just remind everyone, underneath that, there actually is a lot of depth, and it actually is pretty sweet. Number 54, Fantastic Four. This year we finally saw the Fantastic Four return, something that many fans out there have been waiting for a while. But I will be honest with you guys, the reason why this book makes the list is not because the Fantastic Four is back, but it's because Dan Slott is back on The Thing. Years ago, he wrote a Ben Grimm The Thing book. It didn't last for long, but it was such a wonderful series and such a great tribute to this character. You could tell that Dan Slott really cared about Ben Grimm, and the moment that you picked up issue 1 of this book, you could tell he was back. He was here telling stories about this character that he absolutely loved all over again, and he continued that throughout the entire series. In fact, this shouldn't even be the Fantastic Four book. This should just be the Ben Grimm book, because it all led up to his wedding at the end of the year, and in a year when so many other comics out there promised us a wedding and then ripped that football right away from us, not only did they actually deliver on the wedding, it was actually one of the most touching moments of the entire year. It absolutely captured in one issue everything that made the relationship between Ben Grimm and Alicia Masters work. Number 53, Royal City. Jeff Lemire is a guy who is known for writing stories about really big, far out there science fiction concepts, throwing in a dash of fantasy, getting some dark horror in there when he wants. Royal City is a book that is all about just growing up in a small, any-town USA setting. It's what it was like being a kid in the 90s. It's what it was like growing up in a big family. And yes, there is this whole semi-supernatural side to it, but honestly, you could rip all of that out of this book, and just that core premise of just being an incredibly relatable story about just finding your place in the world, that would still easily be enough to get it on this list. Number 52, Avengers. This year when Jason Aaron got put on this book, he did not come in here and say, I'm gonna play it safe, I'm just gonna take my time with this. No, he walked up to the plate, called his shot, and he swung for the fences, and I have to applaud him for that. He came in here and made massive changes to the Avengers. And the Avengers are a team that are always having massive changes happening to them, and yet even among all the big changes that we've seen over the past 2 decades, this still felt fresh. This still felt like stuff we had not seen before. And yet, despite taking so many chances on this book and changing so much around, it still feels like an Avengers book. I love the interactions between these characters. I love watching them have to grow in their new roles on this team among each other. And I love seeing them in battle. When they go charging in, it feels like the Avengers are going in there to save the day. And he is setting up massive storylines. What he did in issue number 700 alone had more stuff set up in there that I wanted to see play out than almost any other single issue of anything this year. And the last book for today's episode, number 51, Highest House. Highest House is a book about a young boy who is sold into slavery to go and work in this giant castle that is almost the size of a city. And yet, after he arrives there, they discover there's something unique about this boy. And there's something dark about this castle. And he and this mystical force within the castle slowly start working together and plotting amongst themselves. This book wins the award for the best slow burn of any book I read this year. Because when I got done with issue number 1, I thought, it's okay, there's some ideas in here. There's certainly some stuff in here that is kind of intriguing. You know what? I'll come back for issue number 2. And I came back for issue number 2. And by the end of that one, I found myself thinking, okay, well, it's starting to pick up. There's certainly some interesting things going on in here, and the plot is definitely moving forward, and I'm kind of curious to see where it's going to go. And by the time that I got to the end of issue number 3, I bought the remaining 3 issues all at once, because I was now so hooked on this book, I did not want to miss anything. This book is not afraid to take its time setting up everything, and as every little twist and reveal comes into light, you realize that was brilliant. You realize the pacing on this absolutely worked out, and I honestly would not have this book any other way. But there you go, folks, part 1 of our look back at the best comics of 2018, number 100 through 51. Come back tomorrow for numbers 50 through 26. We'll be putting up new episodes of this for the remainder of the week until we get to number 1. If you want to know when these episodes go up, you can always follow me on Twitter or Twitch at Professor Thorgy. And if you enjoy these episodes and you want to help support the channel a little bit, you can head over to patreon.com/Professor Thorgy and kick us a couple bucks there. If you do that every single month, you'll get a special little treat just for you guys. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. I'll see you tomorrow.